utilizing in today's event, and hope to be using similar for future types of events. Today we want to welcome back Richard Cadena. Your overwhelming response to Richard's previous presentations caused us to request his return. As most of you already know, Richard's the editor of PLSN, a recognized industry expert and the author of many books on lighting design and other technologies that affect our industry, including electricity for entertainment electricians and technicians, lighting design for modern houses of worship, automated lighting, the art of science and moving light, focus on lighting technology, and his latest work, electricity for entertainment electricians and technicians. Our special guest today, and we're particularly excited about this, is Jeff Ravitz. Jeff has been the lighting designer for Bruce Springsteen since 1984. He was awarded a Primetime Emmy for Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band on HBO, and 2 Los Angeles Emmys for Univision's El Grito de Mexico in 2005 and 2006. Jeff designed lighting for live televised spectaculars, award shows, news magazines, and studio-based productions. Recent work includes the design of television specials for Springsteen, Beyonce, the Black Eyed Peas, and Dave Matthews. So we want to thank Jeff for being here with us today, and welcome him to the series. Thank you, Jeff. Before we get started, we got a little bit of housekeeping I just want to go through for any of you who haven't attended previously. Basically, the audience is in mute mode, so that the speakers can talk, but you can ask questions using the questions or the chat feature. What we'll do is I'll be responding to those during the course of the webinar as they apply to specific things that we're addressing. We'll also be holding some of those until the end of the webinar, so that both Richard and Jeff can respond to anything specific that you might have. And if we run out of time and for some reason can't get to all your questions, then what we'll do is we'll make sure that we answer you via email after the fact. Okay, so what we'd like to do is get started with a couple of quick polling questions, just to find out a little bit about the audience, so Richard and Jeff will have a better idea of who they're actually talking to. So our first polling question is, what's your present position or occupation? And you just basically choose one of those. Are you a student, a teacher, a working professional, or an inspiring professional in lighting design, lighting tech, that type of thing, or other? And we'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that question, and then we'll move on. We basically have 4, just to give us a little bit more background. All right, we've got 90% of you that have voted, so we'll go ahead and we'll close that one out. And basically, your response there, 9% of you are students, 6% are teachers, 63% are working professionals, 20% are aspiring professionals or lighting designers, and 2% fall into the other category. Okay, our second polling question then is, how much experience do you have working with lighting? And your selections are 0 to 1 year, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, or 10 or more. Again, we'll give you a couple of seconds to get that responded to. Okay. We've got about 90% of you that have responded to that as well. We'll go ahead and close that poll. And basically, your response there, 4% are 0 to 1, 10% are 1 to 3, 16% are 3 to 5, 26 are 5 to 10, and 43% are 10 or more. So we've got a lot of experienced professionals out there. Okay. Next question is, do you have experience with any of the following software programs? AutoCAD, WYSIWYG, LD Assistant, Vectorworks, or ESPN Vision? Gives us a better idea. Richard and Jeff both have a lot of experience in this area and their own personal preferences just like to get an idea of the audience that we're speaking to.
Yeah, that's ESP vision.
I'm sorry. Isn't that what I have there? What I say, EPS?
You said ESPN. You know, it's experience.
Well,
in front
I watch too much sports, I guess, you know. Okay, I'll give you a couple extra seconds here. Okay, and results there are 46% say they've got experience with AutoCAD, 37% WYSIWYG, 7% LV Assistant, 42% Vectorworks, and 6% ESP Vision, no ESPN. All right, and our last polling question is, how many shows have you designed? And the choices are none, a few, a lot, or more than I can count. Real active participatory audience this time, Richard. We get up to like 90% plus on every one of these polls, so they really want to jump right in and participate. Okay, and the results on that one are 13% with no design experience or haven't done any shows, 36% a few, 25% a lot, and 26% more than I can count. So we want to thank you for your response there. And I'll go ahead and we'll turn this back over to Richard.
Thank you, Kevin.
Go ahead.
I appreciate you guys hosting this webinar. Thanks to everybody at Creative Stage Lighting. And I particularly want to thank everybody who is attending this. I know it's not easy to take the time out of your day, and I do appreciate it. And I would especially, of course, like to thank Jeff Ravitz. Jeff is one of those designers that I would consider to be in the very top echelon of designers, up there with people like Willie Williams and Peter Morse and Roy Bennett, and you know, but when it comes to being just an all-around great guy, Jeff really has no peers. He's one of the most decent human beings I know, and I really appreciate you being here, Jeff. Are you feeling good, feeling right, like it's Saturday night, Jeff?
Yeah, you know it.
Out of sight. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the design process. And then we'll ask Jeff specifically about some of his approaches to lighting design. You know, I always say that if you ask 10 lighting designers one question about lighting design, you're liable to get 10 different answers, equally valid, but just 10 different approaches. So I think it's interesting to bring in other people's perspective and see how they would approach the subject. But some of the things we're going to be talking about, and we'll talk about these in more detail, but we'll be talking about visibility, revealing the subject, aesthetics, mood and energy, depth and separation, focusing attention. We'll talk about lighting for video, modeling the subject, illuminant targets, uniformity, highlighting the set or architecture, the truck pack, and the budget. So starting right off the bat, just to give you guys a little background, a couple of weeks ago I went and saw one of Jeff's shows. It was Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I took a bunch of pictures and I interspersed them in this presentation. And hopefully Jeff can talk a little bit about these and his approach as we discuss them. So the first thing that I would, when you're sitting down with a new project, one of the first considerations, of course, is that you want the audience to be able to see the subjects. So visibility is way up there at the top of the design goals. Would you say so, Jeff? Is that an accurate assessment?
Well, of course, that's the first objective.
Jeff,
Have a little bit of an echo here.
Yeah. Do you have your computer audio on?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Okay. Kevin, do you?
Yeah, I'm getting the echo on this end, but just when Jeff talks. So I don't know. Well, let's proceed and see if it's,
okay.
You know.
All right. So addressing the issue of visibility, Jeff, where do you place that in your design criterion?
Well, obviously, we're in a situation where people have come to see a live show or they're watching a television show. They could listen to the album at home or the radio, but they're really there to see the performers and to see the spectacle and the overall production. So visibility, of course, is obviously first on the list of things to accomplish.
Yeah, and we're looking at a picture that I shot from the front of house of the entire stage, and it looks very well lit. And I guess the other thing, the notable thing about the show is that there's no smoke or haze.
Well, that's right. On that particular show, the artist does not like haze for the fear that it's going to affect his voice adversely. So we don't use it, and of course, at the time that limitation was presented to me several years ago, I had been used to doing shows relying somewhat on haze to paint those beams in the air and create another level of composition. But way back when I was learning about lighting design, the emphasis was not on beams in the air at all, but it was on how you sculpt the forms out of darkness. And I began having a lot of fun with Bruce doing that since really that was what was now available to me.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking more about sculpting the subject, but obviously the lack of haze and fog does shape your show, but it's got to make it easier on the visibility as well, right?
Well, it does. Of course, there's haze and there's haze, and in some applications it can actually get between the viewer's eyes and the subject, or between the camera and the subject, and then it really can cut down on visibility. So we have a pretty clear environment.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, if you haven't seen this show, if you're in this industry, you really need to go see it, because this is a classic rock show, and you can learn a lot just by looking at Jeff's lighting technique here. I think that if he had the choice, and I may be speaking out of turn, but I would think that just about anybody designing a lighting show had the choice of using haze or not using haze, you'd probably choose to use haze. And is that a fair statement, Jeff?
I think most people doing a concert show do want haze, because they really do think of something tangible between the grid and the floor. And these days, patterns, moving patterns, rotating patterns, all benefit from kind of seeing them hanging there magically in midair, as opposed to what they look like striking a surface. So people are pretty much dependent on it. So it's kind of nice to be on a diet of no haze for a while.
Exactly. Well, so visibility is definitely one of the top criterion for starting your lighting design. And then next, we want to talk about revealing the subject. And I think Jeff did a masterful job of this in the show. You could just turn on the house lights and call it a day, and then you can see the entire band. You've got lighting coming from all directions. It would be flat lighting, but you'd be able to see. Well, part of the mystique of going to a show is watching your rock and roll idols and the people you admire up on stage. And if you get up there and just blast them with light from the word go, then it loses its mystique. On the other hand, there's certain things you can do to reveal the subject. Like we were talking about, you can sculpt them, you can backlight, you can uplight, you can sidelight. You can do all these different things to reveal the subject in a different way. And Jeff does a masterful job of that in this particular show. Now, Jeff, is that something that you consciously did, or is it just a byproduct of your lighting approach?
No, it's something that I consciously did. Way back when I started doing concert work, I realized that I had the opportunity to be almost, cinematic in a way, if I could, say that, because I was directing the audience towards the wide shot or the close-up, just to, put it in its simplest terms. And so I felt the responsibility to kind of direct attention, especially in a show where there's a lot going on, and as good as the audio is, you can't always tell who's playing what or who's singing what at any given moment. So I took that as a responsibility, and then as an outgrowth of that, I realized that there were angles that work to enhance different moods, and obviously the music goes in a wide gamut of emotions and tempos and feels. so I began to experiment with what I felt kind of represented certain moments. And somebody like Bruce is just tailor-made for that, going from just ebullient, happy music to really introspective music that can be slower and quieter, and still powerful. So that's where I'm coming from on that.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about classical approaches to lighting and some alternative approaches to lighting, including different lighting angles. But another consideration in the design process is obviously aesthetics. You want to paint a nice, pretty picture for the audience who paid their hard-earned money to come see the show. In this particular instance, you have a low-profile, kind of a landscape video wall behind the band, and that's kind of a new thing for Bruce, isn't it, Jeff?
Yeah, that's a completely new thing. We've never had any background, let alone a video, and it's been discussed before and abandoned, so we're really trying something brand new.
Yeah, and so what are some of the other ways that you tried to create a pleasing picture without a backdrop or without any big set elements?
Well, really, it's, when there's no background at all, it can get pretty dark between the stage level and the truss. and so I do kind of grab onto anything that I can find on the stage and turn it into a surface that can accept some lighting that creates even a little bit of background for the people that are across the downstage mic lines and so forth. And occasionally, I need to resort to big washes of light that, although they're not as tangible in the air as it might be if I had some haze, they do begin to create a little bit of a contrasty wall of color behind the band, apart from which I can then, cut them out with other lighting. But it's tough. It's a challenge, and sometimes it is just the bottom of the frame and the top of the frame without a whole lot in the middle.
Yeah, and I'd have to say that color, I think, plays a very important part in this particular show, especially given that you have virtually no gobo projection. And we're going to be talking about color in more detail a little bit later on. So aesthetics is the primary consideration. Obviously, the mood and energy, particularly with the artist like Bruce Springsteen, the mood and the energy is really, really important. And I'm showing a picture on the slide now of a big, giant wash of red light. And Jeff, is color something that you use to create mood and energy? And what other elements do you do, like strobes and that type of stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, all of those things. Color is absolutely important. It, conveys to me some sort of such a psychological tone and an emotional tone. And some of that is in the eyes of the beholder, and some of it is just, my impressions. Other people may take it differently, but I think that there's a lot to be said for that. It's an element of contrast, so that when you talk about visibility, I can enhance visibility by contrasting the foreground, maybe, the band, so to speak, versus whatever the background colors might be. Sometimes I can make them almost recede into the background by decreasing that contrast. The other things that I obviously have at my disposal are in the cueing itself. For Springsteen, we don't use a lot of strobing, but we certainly do some fast flashing, and the music lends itself to really hitting some strong beats and accenting the music and sort of keeping pace with it. We try not to be too obvious, but we also help the audience kind of follow along musically. When there's a big musical crash, we of course try to do something appropriate and demonstrative of that, and we try to do it differently each time.
Right. And I'd have to say the timing in this show is really excellent, and I think that's down to your two LDs, John, and help me out here.
And Todd.
Todd Ritchie, and yes. John Huntington, is it?
It's Hoffman, John Hoffman.
Hoffman, that's right, yeah. And they do an excellent job of cueing the show.
Yeah.
Another thing another consideration in the design process is creating that depth and separation, and Jeff just touched on it when he was talking about receding things into the background. So that's by design, and also by, I mean, not only just the lighting layout, but how you program the lights and how you set the lighting levels. Is that right, Jeff?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the foreground, or the, let's say, if you will, the band, bodies versus the background. There's a ratio there that can be played with to different effects. And I'm thinking about that all the time and assessing each moment of the show based on where it falls within that ratio. And I'm not necessarily saying a mathematical one that I'm thinking of, but just a sense and a feel that I get when I see how much the foreground pops from the background, or not, or doesn't pop.
Right, and a lot has to do with whether it's for a live audience or whether it's for a camera. Isn't that right?
Well, very much so. I mean, the techniques that you would use for a live show are tailor-made to make people and bands' features that much more visible over long distances, whereas those very techniques can look a little bizarre in a camera close-up, so you have to find a good, happy medium.
Exactly. So depth and separation is another design consideration. And you also talked about how things recede into the background. Well, that kind of alludes to another design criteria, which is focusing attention. And I'm showing a shot here of where you can see Bruce and the drummer Max very well, and the rest of the band is almost in a blackout. So obviously everybody's attention is focused downstage center on Bruce and Max. And you do that a lot in this show, don't you, Jeff?
Well, absolutely, especially for this show, because there are so many dynamics, and in any given song, it just moves through so many different configurations of who's doing what. The songs are arranged within an inch of their lives, and that makes it a lot more fun for me. So I'm always trying to help the audience see, and in this sense, I create a visual priority list, and I decide, who should be seen more or less. And, just in the most simplistic terms, perhaps somebody in the background might only get backlight or might only get side light, and somebody in the foreground might get a little bit more, more frontal light, or be lit a little brighter or dimmer than the background. And those are all the tools that we've got to work with.
Yeah, and as an aside, we're talking and showing pictures of the Bruce Springsteen show, but Jeff obviously has a lot of other experience, so feel free to mention some other shows where it might be applicable or appropriate. So focusing attention is one of our design goals. Another is it changes a whole lot if there is video. Now, in this case, there's a lot of Imag. There's no B-roll or imagery, but it's all just Imag. So, Jeff, how does that change your lighting approach and lighting design when there's video there?
Well, it's kind of interesting because there's almost a history to Imag. In my experience, when Imag was first introduced as a more common element of shows, maybe 20 years ago, the intention of it was really to magnify what was happening on stage, and people used a lot of color, and they did all those live show lighting techniques that we were talking about a few minutes ago. And with that in mind, the cameras simply captured what was happening, whether it was somebody's idea of proper for broadcast or not. Nobody really cared about that. The engineers that came out on the road cared about it a bit because that was what their training was, but the lighting designers, nobody else cared. All of a sudden, 20 years later, everybody is really TV-centric, with the amount of video that we see on television and elsewhere, with the more sophisticated television productions, the Grammy Awards and all the award shows that we see in concert broadcasts. And with the stars from 20 years ago now having a few more wrinkles than they had, everybody's starting to get a little bit self-conscious about that. And TV is now important not only for vanity, but also just for, hey, I want to look as good as the Grammys. So that's really where Imag has now forced most of us LBs that are out there doing shows in arenas and stadiums to pay attention to the techniques of good TV as well.
Now, does it change your lighting positions and lighting and types of fixtures when there's Imag? And how much difference is there between just lighting for Imag and lighting for a television show?
Oh, there's a ton of difference in that your angles begin to get a little shallower, in some cases a lot shallower. The sorts of steep angles that might be ultra dramatic and a lot of fun just don't work for the camera. And if I want Bruce or Patty or any performer that I work for to look their best on that screen, which is the brightest thing in the entire room, and everybody kind of looks at that before they even look at the stage, I better make sure that I've got some, slightly less steep angles. I also have to pay attention to intensity, where I don't suddenly have 7 lights on one person because it'll blow the cameras out and make everybody else look really, really dark on stage. And then color is an important element. I can't slather the stage and people's faces with all kinds of deep color as I might have done years ago, because color was fun and color was expressive and all of that. Now I'm finding myself looking for the more neutral colors that make people's skin tones look really good.
Right, and so we'll be talking more about uniformity and lighting angles a little bit later on. But part of on the subject of lighting angles, part of the motive for that is sculpting the subject or modeling the subject. So you mentioned lower lighting angles for video, which makes more of a flat lighting. To me, it's less interesting. I like to see a contrast between shadow and light, but for some reason it seems that video people don't like that as much. But in this particular show, Jeff, I think you used a lot of different lighting angles. Is that to help model the subject and show the form of the figure, or is it for some other reason?
No, it's for that, and also I think I found some good angles that accomplish what you were saying that you missed, and that that sort of overcome that flat syndrome and still make it look viable and good on TV. In other words, you can also take lights off axis from straight front, and as you start to move off to the side, even if it's at a slightly lower angle, it still creates some interesting shadow. And shadow is really what helps us to see, and really what defines shapes. And the other thing that I'm very, very big on is good, strong backlight. So even if I have a reason to light somebody very frontally, if I catch them with the right backlight, and then I've also got an interesting background behind them, then I totally fulfill the obligation of not keeping it flat.
Right. You've created some depth and separation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, I've always kind of said that I think a well-designed show with TV techniques in mind can be viable for the audience, also in a non-television way, but it doesn't always go the other way.
Right. Now, sometimes you have certain illuminance targets, particularly if you're working with the video crew. What about in a rock and roll tour, Jeff? When you design your layout, are you looking for a certain light level on the stage?
For sure. I've got to be mindful of two things. One is that there are people that are 300-400 feet away, as much as 600 feet away in the stadium. So they've got to see what's happening on stage. So I've got to keep the light level, higher than I might if it were just done on a sound stage or a small club. But by the same token, if I get those light levels so bright on somebody's face, then that means that everything else has to be lit as brightly, like the background, if there is a background, the audience, if we want to see the audience in any of the shots. And now that the Imag is actually, showing some audience reactions because it's fun for them to see. So I've got to make sure that I don't make things so bright that everything then has to be really bright, because the camera can only see a limited range of brightnesses. So yeah, I'm definitely thinking of all of that stuff when I design.
Do you take into consideration the difference between young eyes and old eyes? If you were lighting, for example, for Miley Cyrus's tour instead of Bruce Springsteen's tour, would that make a difference to you?
That's a really good question. I've got to say that's not really foremost in my mind, because I still think I'm dealing with the difference between somebody that's in the front row 10, 20 feet away and somebody that's in the back row 300 feet away. And I figure if I take care of that I'm dealing with the difference between aging eyes and young eyes.
There you go. Then we touched on the subject of uniformity. Obviously, if you have
Come back one.
video acquisition, then you want some uniformity, because video engineers hate it when they have to constantly ride the iris and shade the cameras. So a lot of TV designers will just simply wash the entire stage and try to make it as uniform as possible. Have you ever taken that approach, Jeff?
Well, you have to a certain extent. You can't just forget that. But then, again, differences in level can be what you're going for in terms of that priority, that visual priority I was talking about. By the same token, you do have to make sure that two people standing next to each other that might be in the same camera shot are somewhat in the same range of lighting. Now, for the naked eye, most of that stuff doesn't matter, and you can do some ultra dramatic things and not even have to worry about it. But as soon as that camera gets into the scheme of things, you have to at least be within a certain range between two people in the same shot, and between a background and a foreground.
Right. So you don't want hot spots and cold spots if you can help it.
Right. And I don't necessarily wash the stage. I do that for certain types of more conservative shows, but for a rock show, I don't generally just wash the stage with a big wash of light. Although in Springsteen's show, we do have one song where, all 11 people on stage are just spread right across the front of the stage, and I do resort to the wash because it's the only way to cover them. But that's an exception rather than the rule.
Right. Now, in this particular instance on this tour, there are no set elements other than maybe the amplifiers and the drum kit. But I'm sure you've done a lot of tours where you have a lot of set elements and you want to either highlight it or project onto it in some way. But I think you did say that bridge where Bruce walks upstage, that you like the heck out of that, right?
Well, yeah, it actually it creates a tiny bit of a wall that's about 8 feet high. So I take advantage of that, and then there's kind of a runway that he can stand on that goes all the way across the back of the stage, and there's a handrail that goes across that. And I have that handrail designed to look really nice so that I can light it, and it actually is like the first background element that I've had in a Springsteen show in many, many years.
But that is one of the considerations when you're doing lighting design, is to highlight the set or the architecture. Another very important consideration is the truck pack. Have you ever had to redesign or take another stab at a design so it would fit better in a truck, or do you ever take that into consideration?
Sure. I've got to say that I don't really sit down and assess at some point, how many feet of truck space does this take up, because the vendors are so much better at helping to calculate that. So I might have to do it more as a trial and error, where I've got a sense after all these years of what's going to fit, and I'll send it off to them, and they may get back to me and say, well, you're just one piece of truss too many for one truck, and so I'll adjust myself that way. It's a little less calculated for me.
Right. Okay. Now, here's the big difference between the shows that I've designed and the shows that Jeff has designed. I've never had a carte blanche budget or a big check budget show. Jeff, how much is budget consideration in a lot of the shows you do?
Well, of course, it's huge. A lot of times, a producer of a show or a promoter or tour director will just give me an amount of money, a weekly amount, or sometimes I'm doing a one-off, and it's an amount of money that I have to back into. Once in a while, I'll go back to them and I'll say, I can't do what you want me to do for this amount of money, no matter how hard I try, and then we have to sit down and either rethink the wish list or rethink the budget. But then there are those shows where I don't. And, those are fun. They can also be scary because you just have no excuses at all.
Right. Right. Well, for most of us, budget is usually the first consideration after it's all said and done. Somebody's going to come back and say, well, we don't have enough money to do what you designed, so you have to take that into consideration. So let's talk about some of the elements of a lighting system. I want to talk about front light, backlight, side light, the color wash, the spots, projection if there is any, strobes, audience blinders, truss warmers, and floor lighting. We're going to talk about each of those in detail. Now, we talked about lighting for visibility. One of the main approaches to lighting for visibility is to use your front light or key light with the backlight, and then you use side light or fill light. Now, in this particular instance, for the Bruce Springsteen tour, you have a lot of follow spots. I think there were 4 in the front of house truss. There were, were there 4 or 6?
There's 4 out front, and then I've got some that are directly to the side of the mic line, and then 3 behind.
3 behind? Okay, and then there's the front of house spots as well. I mean, the house spots, right?
Yes, we use 3 or 4 house spots, depending on the configuration of the building.
Okay, so that's your first line in visibility, would you say, in this particular tour?
It is. Everybody moves around a lot. You have to be ready to go anywhere at any time, so follow spots are the solution.
Yeah, so now not all tours have follow spots. Some of them just rely on a 3-point lighting system or maybe a 4-point lighting system. Now, if you've got video, then you obviously want a video wash for front light, and we're going to talk about the different kinds of instruments you can use for that particular situation. Let's see. The nice thing about follow spots, like you said, that they can follow people around, but they also are a lower angle than if you had the light from the front of house truss. Isn't that right? Definitely the house spots are a wild card in our arsenal because, especially if you're just using whatever's there in the building. That's why we actually have our own follow spot bridge, and the lights that really do the lion's share of the follow spot work are very consistent for us. They're at a locked-in angle to the stage, and those front of house spots in the building are just used for when Bruce goes way out on one of those runways that almost gets past the light. Yeah. Do you ever have any artists that complain about the glare from follow spots? Yeah. I have one on the Springsteen tour. He just doesn't like that light in his eyes. And that is something that I come across every now and then. And we have to find angles that work for them. You don't want to just underlight somebody that's important on the stage because it looks like something's wrong, and they kind of foul up your whole composition. But you do try to find some sort of courtesy angle for them that keeps them concentrating on their performance without constantly feeling like they've got something uncomfortable happening. Yeah, and that's one of those lighting design trade-offs. If you have a steep angle, you get a lot of shadows. If you have a low angle, you get a lot of glare. Now, one thing I noticed that Todd was doing before the show, he took out a light meter and he called the spots down to his Avolight console, and he actually balanced all the spots, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, Jeff? Well, it's back to the video thing. There's a high degree of importance placed on the video image for this particular tour, and we have gotten to the point where when I'm out, I would color balance the spots with a color meter and intensity balance them with a regular light meter, and we've gotten Todd those tools as well, so he can do it on more of a daily basis. We sort of thought that my initial readings would hold for the course of the tour, but they drift a little bit, so he double checks them. Now, is he checking just to make sure they're balanced, or is he actually looking for a certain illuminance level? Both. We're checking for color, and we're checking for intensity. So yes, absolutely. We're trying to make sure that those spots aren't too bright or not bright enough to match up with the rest of the design. Right. Okay, so after the follow spots, one of the classic ways of lighting a subject is to use the McCandless method. Now, Stanley McCandless was a Yale professor in the 1920s and 30s who wrote a lab manual called A Method of Lighting the Stage. Not the method, because obviously there's many different methods. This is a method that he suggested. And he was the first guy to come up with a formal way of lighting with 3 sources. He would use 2 lights, a key and a fill at 45-degree angles from the subject, both off the horizon and off the vertical from the subject. And then he would use a backlight, and those 3 lights were the basis for the McCandless method. Jeff, is that still a valid approach in certain instances?
It absolutely is. In the simplest terms, it helps create that sense of dimension in modeling, and what McCandless was trying to do was to find an angle that looked good on people's faces so that it would create maybe a little bit of a shadow under their eye sockets and under their chin, so that it helped enhance some contrast and visibility for them. And the two side 45-degree angles were, and he would advocate that sometimes in two different colors, so that there was a little bit of contrast on people from one side or the other. Totally valid.
Right. He calls that toning, and he used a warm tone and a cool tone on either side of the face. Do you have Do you have gels that you prefer for that, Jeff, or does it vary according to the show?
It totally varies according to the show.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for that combination, show by show.
Yeah, I've seen shows where it looked, having a warm on one side and cool on the other looked totally fine to the human to the human eye, but then on camera it looks totally wrong, wicked, just too saturated. But anyway, so this is a plot showing two lighting a subject at a 45-degree angle, and obviously for each of the subjects they would have their own key and fill light as well. This is a rendering of what it looks like to light one subject from 45 degrees on either side of the subject, and here is a side elevation of the same two lights lighting the subject on the downstage edge. Here's a close-up. You can't really tell a whole lot from it, but what you can kind of make out is, like Jeff said, you get just a little bit of shadow under the eye socket, under the jowls, under the nose, and it kind of sculpts and defines the form of the subject. So the McCandless method works great for theater and for live audiences, but for video, maybe not so much. There's other approaches that I've used for video that I think work well. Here, this is another quadrature showing different angles of the same two lights and the same subject. I tend to start, for warm and cool, I tend to start with Roscoe Lux 2 and a 51 for key and fill. There's the cross references as well for different brands. Now let's talk a little bit about backlight. Backlight is that third element in the McCandless method, but it's a very important part of the lighting design because it gives the subject form and shape, and it can outline the subject and kind of help define what the subject looks like. But Jeff, you used it for more. I think you used it for more than just a third light. Sometimes it was the only light on the stage, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a pretty dramatic and powerful look when you just backlight somebody, and Bruce likes that look a lot. So, I mean, I think if it were up to him, there would be more backlight and less front light, but he knows that people do need to see him, and the cameras need to see him. But it is just something that we can take advantage of in a rock show. It may not have much to do with reality, and you might not do it in a play, except if there were, an extreme motivating, reason to do it. But in a rock show, you can do it just because it feels right, and it's a little bit impressionistic and abstract. So, that's a great tool in our art.
Yeah, and a lot of times I think that the artists like it because they can see the audience with the backlight. Isn't that true?
Yes. It does have that little byproduct.
Yeah. So with backlight, I have found in the past that 65 degrees works pretty well. Much higher than that, it starts to be a top light. So, and then also you talked about varying the light levels of the ratio between the front light and the back light. Again, for me, a good jumping off point is 50% of the key light, and sometimes much stronger than that. What about you, Jeff? What do you think? How do you approach the balance between the front light and the back light?
I've got a couple of different things that I have to think about. The funny thing about doing TV is that sometimes there's that reverse shot where the camera's behind the subject and they're seeing them from from back there. In general, I do like the 2-to-1 ratio as well. If I want to really create an effect, I'll increase it. I rarely go below that unless I'm just side lighting somebody and I don't want any other lighting influence at all. Maybe I'll just get rid of the backlight. But if I know that there are going to be a lot of shots, and even in the live Springsteen show in the Imag, they've got cameras behind him, and they're always taking that shot. So I try to take the backlight level almost to the point where it's equal to the front light. Now, from the front, you can still see it. It's still doing its job as a backlight, but it's a lot more balanced so that they can take any shot they want and nothing seems out of kilter.
Yeah, and in this particular case, the backlight on Springsteen becomes the front light for a lot of people who are sitting behind him.
Oh, well, that, in the case of his show, right, there are, 1,000 or so people that actually sit behind the stage.
Right. So here's a plot showing some backlight. These are par cans backlighting a subject with medium flood. What do you like to use for backlight, Jeff?
Well, again, it depends on the circumstance. I do like hard, sharp backlight. In Springsteen's show, I've got a variety of lights, and I'm really playing with texture and color temperatures with those lights. I've got a battery of tungsten wash lights as my backlight in one instance, so that's soft. Then I will cut through it with a hard edge moving profile light that's an arc source. And so, again, it really does depend on the instance. Sometimes I like backlighting people with gobos because it really kind of makes their hair glisten in an interesting way, but it still does the job of a backlight.
Exactly. So here's a rendering showing backlight, and here's a side elevation of the backlight, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I'll put barn doors on the backlight to cut down on the glare for the people in the front row. I think in a lot of instances that's just the price you pay for sitting on the front row. Do you ever take that into consideration, Jeff, that the glare for the people in the audience?
Yeah, for sure. There are some shows that are just have a little bit more conservative, traditional audiences that don't like that light in their eyes at all. They're not used to it, and so I need to modify that. And then there are some times when, in a video instance, that backlight lights the audience almost brighter than I want them to be lit, or in some color that I don't want them to be lit in. So I do have to watch it. Right,
right. Here's another rendering of a subject is backlit only, and let's see, this is, okay, the next slide, which is coming up on your screen, is the entire three-point, McCandless method three-point lighting, showing the plot. Now, if video is brought in, then from my perspective, that changes the entire lighting plot. So rather than use a three-point lighting system, I'll then go to a four-point lighting system, which is sometimes referred to as the jewel method of lighting. And I think, Jeff, you once told me several years ago that when I was asking you about McCandless and jewel lighting, you said the more points, the better. Do you still feel that way?
No, not necessarily. But, I mean, maybe the more points, the better, but not necessarily all at the same time.
Right, I understand. Okay. So if you bring in two fill lights that are perpendicular to the subject, and then move your front light directly in front of the subject and leave your backlight there, now you've got a four-point lighting system. So what that does for video people is that it gives them more flat lighting, and it makes their job easier. They think it looks better on the screen. Like I said, I tend to like shadows, soft shadows, not necessarily harsh shadows, soft shadows. But a four-point lighting system is kind of a compromise for the video people, in my opinion. Do you ever sit down, Jeff, and purposely plot out a four-point lighting system? Well,
sometimes I do in a multi-camera situation, like almost a news magazine show where somebody will look to one camera, then look at another angle to another camera, and the lighting tends to get a lot flatter, but nobody's really interested in drama in those circumstances anyway.
Right.
Most of the time, I don't really look for that sort of thing, and, you know, in a sense, the fewer lights, the better to achieve the drama that, you know, that a lot of the rock shows that I do require. Right,
yeah. Let's see. So here's a front elevation showing the side light, or the fill light. Here's a little rendering showing just the side light. What about looks with just side light by itself? Isn't that pretty dramatic, Jeff?
It's really dramatic, and I avail myself of that a lot because sometimes when you just reveal, you know, half of somebody's face and leave the other half of their face in complete shadow, it can, you know, really say a lot about the moment that you're lighting, and it just makes you zero in on the lyrics as well sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And if somebody's really cut really well, like Ballet Dancers, that's an excellent look, don't you think?
Well, it really, you know, accentuates the form and the shape of whatever it is you're lighting. In the case of a human face, which it's got so many interesting contours, or a human body, that can be a great look. And you know, of course, dance lighting designers utilize it because it really does create an edge and a dimension that makes you see the movement and the dancer's legs and arms so well. So I love that.
Right, right. So I'm showing a slide now of where the stage is lit very uniformly, and I think that I would consider this a video wash where the entire stage is lit very uniformly so that it looks good on camera. So the key thing there is that you don't have the hot spots and the cold spots. And here's a lighting plot showing the front light and the back light. The side light is not illustrated here, but there is some side light. Take my word for it. Then here's a rendering showing just front light for a video wash, and you can see that it's lit very flatly. All of the subjects are revealed with very little shadow, and it's uniform. This look was done with just lining up some Fresnels across the front of the truss. And lastly, you did some uplighting. I think you did that with the floor lights. Did you not, Jeff?
Yeah, it's a big part of a Springsteen show. He loves that, and we use it very judiciously to really make some statements. You know, it's kind of a macabre look, and again, what I like about it is that it totally surprises the audience and changes the perspective of everything. When you light somebody from below, it just completely warps their features for a moment. So I love doing that, and people definitely sit up and take notice.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I think this is during a breakdown in a song. So it was like a real slow moment, and then you had this uplighting, and it was just wicked. It was really beautiful. Yeah.
And Bruce does some songs that are about dead people, and so, of course, that's kind of tailor-made for songs about dead people.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So, when you're designing...
Hey, Richard?
Sorry, yeah.
Hey, Richard, I hate to break in, but I've had a work situation that's accelerated, and I've got about 10, 15 minutes left before I have to go because I've got a little emergency here.
Okay.
Is it possible to maybe take a few questions before I have to leave?
Why don't we do that? Kevin? I know there's one question from George Tellis here, and it says, in matter of colors, do you prefer to use washout colors rather than primary colors? Or I would word that as, do you prefer pastels over saturated colors? I think that's what George means. George is from Athens, Greece.
Well, that's a good question. I've got to say that lately I've been veering more towards pastel colors, but you know, there's no hard and fast rule about that. I just kind of use what feels right for that particular show. There are shows that I would never put a saturated color on, but most rock shows, there's some place in that show where I guarantee a good, rich, saturated color is going to be just what we want.
Yeah, and I've got some pictures from Bruce Springsteen's show where there are some very saturated colors And then there are also some where they're very subtle pastels, and I think they both work equally effectively depending on the situation. Kevin, are you there? Well, somehow we lost Kevin.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of others here. I have how much pre-planning of the lighting occurs in a very large show where the primary fixtures are going to be the moving lights, intelligent lighting. They said with a purely conventional show, every unit needs a specific purpose and location. Is designing with a fully automated rig planned out, or is it a lot of experimenting and testing?
That's a really excellent question. I've kind of gone both ways with that, but the fact is, when I put moving lights into a design, I have some basic purpose in mind for them. Some of them I have a very specific purpose, and I'll actually write that on the plot, that these are assigned to doing certain things. Maybe some lights are better for, they are there for scenery, and the type of light they are chosen to light the scenery. Some lights are chosen to light people, backlight, a different light for a backlight than might be for a front light or a side light, and some of it is just TBD. And yeah, I do leave myself the freedom to make some decisions in the programming process, so that certain lights can go anywhere. But that's the kind of funny thing about moving lights. You've got these lights, and once you use them someplace else, one place, they're not available to do something else. So I do try to sort of partition them off in a sense, and know what I'm planning on doing with which lights.
Okay, great, understood. We got Justin Poe, and Justin's asking, what is the theme referring for key light? I'm not sure what Justin really means by that, but
Speed, as in shutter speed, or what?
Yeah, he hasn't given me details, so I'm not really sure. Maybe Justin can provide us with more detail on that, and I'll take another question here.
Okay.
How do you work with your programmers? Do you tell them exactly what you want, or do you show them looks and then let them go up and create on their own?
Done both, and some of it depends on the programmer too. Some programmers really want you to spell it out. Some programmers want you to just sort of inspire them and tell them what you need, and then let them go ahead and do it. It used to be years ago that you really had to tell your programmer exactly what you wanted, and then as programmers have become, co-designers in such a strong sense, it is possible to say, look, I need something fast here, I need something multicolor, I need it coming from here or there, or a fly out. We've now got a pretty good collection of terminology that everybody understands, and so not to be vague about the answer, but I certainly do it both ways. And sometimes, if I'm doing a show that I have very specific needs, I know more about the show than the programmer does. I will come in and tell them exactly what I need moment by moment, and I just hope that they can do it as fast as possible.
Okay, understood. Let's see, James Brink has a question. Do you use saturated colors for backlight?
Occasionally I do, for a televised show, I saturate a lot less because the camera gets a little fuzzy and doesn't like it nearly as much unless I'm trying to do that for a special effect. Sure, but I will say this about that whole concept. I like having a lighter backlight to pick people out and to sort of reveal them perhaps in the midst of a more saturated wash for a rock show. If I'm lighting somebody with, let's say, no other light on stage at all, and it's just them being backlit, then I can indulge myself in a slightly more saturated backlight.
Okay, great. Let's see, Claude has a question. Is the general philosophy less is better? How do you respond to that?
Well, definitely, that is so much the case, and I've learned an awful lot about that in the last 15 years of my career, when I've been doing so much more television. The first thing you learn is how to strip away things and how much better things look when you just really light it very carefully so that you are managing the shadows. You don't have 7 nose shadows on somebody kind of arrayed around their face because you've got lights hitting them from 7 different angles. And you just learn that in nature there's one light, really. And so as you begin with that philosophy, your design begins to get a lot more specific and a lot prettier.
Gotcha. Okay. A couple of more questions, and then we need to let Jeff get going here. How much time goes into the design and programming of a show like the Springsteen show?
Well, the design can take a month or so, and some of it depends on other information that you need from other people. So sometimes I'm sitting around waiting for information about music, or even scenery is slightly an overstatement for this show. But we do have elements that need to be dealt with scenically, and so as I'm waiting for other people to evolve their aspect of it, that can slow me down. But essentially, of course, I've gotten faster over the years, and my brain kind of attacks the design a little better and more efficiently than it used to. So it can take a month to really get it going. Then we generally program the show for 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. All right. Great. How about we do one more? Do you have any advice or experiences with lighting a show with extremely limited hang positions and gear?
Ooh, wow. Extremely limited hang positions, of course, the question is, where are those positions? Are they all in the front? Are they all in the back, etc.? But, that gets back to the less is more. You just have to be really judicious. You really have to kind of remember that, that less is more, and, do the important things first. Sometimes, you could adequately light a person with just 2 lights, maybe a front light and a back light, and, choose the angle that you think looks the best. And it's always good to have something on the background. So you kind of have to, figure out what are the most important things to you. But, there is a point that less is less also. You do get to that moment where you realize I'm just going to have to do this as basically as possible, and I don't even really have enough to do any major changes. I've sort of got one look, set it and forget it. So I would say the best advice is just have your priority list and squeeze the most out of what you have.
Great. Okay, well, Jeff, we don't want to keep you. We know you've got a busy schedule and you've got some crises to go taken care of, and those in the industry understand what that's all about because we all have to deal with those on a daily basis. So, again, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate you being here, and
thanks,
we'll let
Jeff.
you get going.
It's been really enjoyable. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin and Richard. It was a lot of fun. Good.
Great.
Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.
Okay, take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so Richard, I guess it's down to just you and I, so I'll turn it back over to you. And if it's okay, we'll save some more questions for the end, but we'll let Richard, can go on with the rest of this show, and we can go from there.
Okay, I'll continue on through the slides, and I will try to pick up where we left off. We're talking about designing a plot, and obviously you want to be able to evaluate photometric data so that you can figure out what lighting instruments to use. So a lot of times the manufacturers will have this data available on their websites. You can go look it up, and if you're lucky, they'll have something like this chart that shows you the illuminance at a certain throw distance. And if you obviously your throw distance is going to be unique. It may or may not be in the chart. So you might have to resort to some calculation, or if you have a good lighting design software, it can help you. But knowing your illuminance formulas is very helpful in your lighting design, obviously. I sometimes use ERS, or ellipse oil reflector spotlights, for front light. I like to use them because you can use the shutters to keep them off where it's not supposed to be. You can keep them off of set pieces. You can keep them off of projection screens, and you can kind of shape the beam. You can keep it off the lip of the stage so it doesn't distract. So I like to use that instrument for front light and for side light. Fresnels are great for washing a stage, particularly for video. The thing that I find challenging with them is that they're big and they sometimes create problems for line of sight, and the barn doors don't always shape the beam well enough to be able to keep light off of where it needs to be. But other than that, they're great for lighting for video or lighting for photography. Par cans are cheap. but the problem with them is that they image the filament. So if you look at the beam projected on a flat surface, you can actually see some shadow and light from the filament. So for that reason, I don't like to use them for front light, but I do like to use them for backlight because they put out a lot of light. They're cheap. They're not real efficient. So if you're looking for efficiency, I'd go to something like an ETC Source 4 par or Altman Star Par, I think it's called. So for key light, fill light, and backlight, you can use Licos, Fresnels, and Pars. And then once you have all of your visibility issues taken care of, then you can start thinking about adding in effects. Your automated lights, your strobes, your truss warmers, your audience blinders. You can put some lights on the floor for your uplighting or for backlighting. Backlighting from the floor is very effective as well. And then, of course, you can light your scenic. You can do your scenic lighting with maybe some LEDs and get some kind of projection as well, whether that's with automated lighting or whether it's with projectors. Now, once you've got your lighting plot done and you want to start programming, then you want to group your lights together to make it easier to program. For example, you might create a group with just your front light, just your stage right side light, just your stage left side light, your downstage backlight, upstage backlight, so on and so forth. So you've got all these groups, and that helps your programming go much faster. And another key to creating programs very quickly is to use preset focus positions, especially if it's a touring show where you're going and setting up the show night after night after night in a different venue. The positions are going to change slightly, so you can update your console if you've programmed everything using preset focus positions. This is a quadrature showing a light plot with the various preset positions that you might use, one on each subject, obviously, one stage right, one stage left, and then maybe one in midair to do aerial beam projections, and just make as many preset focus positions as you can. Then once you've got them preset focus positions set out, then you can start creating your programs. And if you'll put some in midair, then you can do some aerial beam projection, which comes in really handy and looks really nice. So if you have fog, then aerial beams can be a really important part of the show. And if you use different light sources, then you can have some lights that have a big fat beam, some that have narrow beam, and you can vary your look by using different sources with the same aerial beams. You can crisscross them, do all different types of things. You can create symmetrical aerial beams, or you can create asymmetrical aerial beams just to give it some variation and make it more interesting rather than just predictable all the time. So once you have all of your aerial beams, then you might want to consider your color presets. Now, there's a couple of different approaches to using color. One is, what looks good, and the other is, well, let's learn a little bit about color and figure out what goes together well, and that's the approach that I like to take. So adding color obviously can bring aesthetic appeal, but it can also help you with your depth and separation. It can set the mood, it can create energy, and it can do all of these things for your show. Now what you use to create color wash can vary quite a bit, but lately LED fixtures have come into vogue because they're very efficient. They're small, lightweight, they don't take a lot of power, they don't use a lot of power distro, they're easy to set up, and they're very good at creating color wash. So you might want to use those, or you can use automated lights as well for color wash. So let's talk a little bit about color theory. There is such a thing as color theory, and it comes mostly from the painting world. If you research books about color, it's much easier to find information if you look to the painters. People have been painting for hundreds and thousands of years, whereas we've only been lighting for tens of years or maybe 100 years at the most. But the painter's color wheel is divided into 12 sections, and you've got your primary colors, red, green, and blue, red, blue, and yellow. your secondary colors, green, orange, and purple, and then your tertiary colors, which are combinations of primary and secondary colors. These come from the fact that if you mix these colors together, red, blue, and yellow makes black. Green, orange, and purple also makes black when you mix it together. So that's a subtractive color mixing color wheel. Since we work with light, we do just the opposite. We use additive color. So our color wheel is a little bit different. Our color wheel is divided into, our primary colors are red, green, and blue, because when you mix red, blue, and green light together, you get white light. So we're mixing towards white. Our secondary colors are cyan, magenta, and yellow, and then our tertiary colors are mixtures of primary and secondary colors. So this is the color wheel that I put together for lighting designers. Now, the theory comes in when you start analyzing how these colors interact with each other. One of the strongest ways of interacting is to use complementary colors, and that's simply if you go directly across the color wheel, you'll find color complements. And this shows the available color complements from a 12-color color wheel. You have green magenta, green yellow, indigo, blue and yellow, so on and so forth. So those are all the complementary color combinations. This is a picture from Jeff's show showing his use of complementary colors. He's got magenta and some version of blue or cyan, I guess, washing the stage. Here is another example showing a very strong blue and yellow, and I think that's a very powerful color combination that he used there. There's also such a thing as split complementary colors, and that's where you take one color and its complement, but you go to either side of the complement. So you're using three colors, you're splitting one of the complements on either side, and you're using that color combination. With a 12-position color wheel, there are 12 different split complementary color combinations that you can use. Now, I don't suggest these as formulaic color combinations that you can take and throw into your show and have a nice show, but it is a good jumping off point. It's a good point to start and experiment and see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Here is an example of Jeff using split complementary colors. In this instance, he's got red, blue, and green. And I wish that we could ask him whether he intended to do that or whether he just thought it looked good. That's the million-dollar question. Then there's also such a thing as triads, and that's equally split in the color wheel color combinations. And with there's 4 different triads in this color wheel. And, this is getting into the area where you're starting to mix more than 2 colors, and I think you should be very judicious with that. I think the most powerful color combinations are monochromatic looks with white and 2-color looks. When you start getting into 3 color combinations, you really have to be careful because you can muddy it up very, very easily. But if you're going to use triads, you can do it and make it look really nice. Here's an example of Bruce Springsteen with a color triad that looks great. But notice that use of color is very judicious. It's not randomly splashed in lots of different places, but it's concentrated in certain areas. Here's another example. He's got a big red wash in the audience, in the front of house. He's got, looks like Lee 181 as truss warmers, and then there's some yellow on the stage. So the combination of those 3 colors is a triad. Analogous colors are colors that are side by side in the color wheel, and they also make good color combinations as well. Here, these are all examples of triads. And here is a shot that I took that shows red and yellow together. I think that's a very effective analogous color combination. I mentioned before the use of any monochromatic color plus white makes a very good, aesthetically pleasing picture. There's an example there. Jeff used a lot of monochromatic looks in his show. In this particular instance, he's got a wash of cyan everywhere. Just a big giant cyan color wash. Here's one with magenta that looks really good. And he did several more as well, monochromatic looks in his show. And, you know, Jeff mentioned the color symbolism, you know, whether you associate it yourself or whether a lot of different people make the associations. There are certain colors that have strong associations. For example, red is a very aggressive color. It conveys danger, and it's dynamic, it's energetic, it's very strong like fire and blood. It's the color of Coca-Cola. It's the old laser light look, and it's very rock and roll. Green looks really, you can use it to make it skin look really pale and like a monster or an alien. But on the other hand, you can also use it as a cool color to make it give the feel of forest and trees and grass. It's also associated with money and envy and emeralds. It's very strongly associated with St. Patrick's Day, especially that real primary green, and of course the Celtic culture. Blue is a cold color. It's often used to convey coldness or ice or melancholy. It's a primary blue is IBM's color. Purple is associated with passion and mysticism and royalty. Yellow is cowardice and sunshine. And of course, orange is often used to portray the sunset. And white is often associated with purity and clouds, snow, peace, surrender, all of those types of things. Now, there's a book that Johann Itten wrote. Itten was a professor at the Bauhaus back in the 30s, and he wrote this book called Color. Let's see, here it is right here. It's called The Art of Color. And he talks about the 7 contrasts. The 7 contrasts that he points out are contrast of saturation, contrast of light and dark, contrast of proportion, contrast of complements, simultaneous contrast, where 2 colors are so strongly opposite that they kind of vibrate. There's a contrast of hue and the contrast of warm and cool, like we talked about with the McCandless method. And if you notice, if you go to shows and you start looking for these contrasts, you'll see a lot of these in there. Here's an example of a strong contrast of saturation where you have a very blue saturated light, and then you have a cyan light as well. Here is an example of the contrast of light and dark, where you see the big shadows projected on the side walls. That's an example of contrast of light and dark. Here's another rendering that I did of contrast of light and dark, and this is simply using backlight. That's all we're doing here is using backlight, and it makes a very strong statement. You can also use gobos to create a strong contrast of light and dark, particularly if it's all white light and it's breakup patterns. That creates a lot of shadow, a lot of contrast between light and dark. There's also contrast of proportion, where you can take big giant areas and wash them, and then you leave other areas either uncolored or maybe just a splash of color, and you have a contrast of proportion. Contrast of complements is simply where you take complementary colors and contrast those. It's a very effective way of building a scene. Simultaneous contrast is the contrast between 2 colors that are so strongly opposed that they vibrate, kind of like the difference between red and blue. You know, red focuses the light on one part of your eye, green focuses it on another, and there's this kind of battle going on, and that's what causes them to vibrate. And here's an illustration of the contrast of hue, the contrast between a very strong purple and a very strong green. That's contrast of hue. And here's some other renderings showing contrasts of hue with 3 different colors. So obviously once you get your colors programmed, then you can start programming your dynamic elements. You can change your focus. You can do your chases, your strobes, your audience blinds. That's where the programming and the lighting direction comes in. Okay, so if you're an aspiring lighting designer and you want to take that next step, then here are some steps that I would suggest that you take. And first of all, I think it's really important to read something every day. Spend at least 15 minutes, preferably an hour, reading. And here are some titles that I would suggest using. Light Fantastic is a great book. It's very interesting. Then secondly, buy a computer if you don't have one already, and get some lighting design software. There's lots of really great software packages out there, and computers are getting so much more powerful and more affordable these days. There's really no reason not to have a laptop or a good graphics computer. And then practice with some of these lighting design software packages like WYSIWYG, Vectorworks, ESP Vision, LD Assistant. You can really get good at lighting design and programming by using these visualizers. I would also suggest taking webinars and seminars and do as much training as you possibly can. And if you have the opportunity to go to a trade show, by all means take it, because you can meet so many people and make connections and learn so much about the industry just by going to trade shows. And lastly, if you want more information about any of the topics we discussed, I don't want to do the self-promotion thing a whole lot, but there are some books that you can look at to help you along in your career. Okay, so I don't know if we have questions, but we've reached. Sorry,
there's a few more out there. If you have just a moment or two, I don't think there's a lot. I've got a couple more.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there any difference for usage of key light in different categories of shows, like the difference between doing rock and roll versus theater versus drama, that type of thing? Do you have any preferences there?
Well, the main difference is whether you're lighting for a live audience or whether you're lighting for Imag or whether you're lighting for television. If you're lighting for a live audience, then the canvas method works very well. The eye is so forgiving, the human eye is so forgiving that it doesn't see those shadows as a problem. The camera, on the other hand, does. So if you're lighting for a live audience, I would just use a 3-point lighting system. If you're lighting for Imag or for television, then I would go to a 4-point Jewel lighting system, and that seems to work better.
Okay. As a designer for concert lighting, do you find that the designer will actually travel with the show, or once they design the show, are they pretty well done at that point?
Well, that depends on the level of the designer. Somebody like Jeff will do the design, and he'll go to rehearsals, and he'll go to the first few shows, and then he'll turn it over to his lighting directors, and then he'll go on and do another project. But as an aspiring lighting designer or a young, less experienced lighting designer, I would highly recommend that you not only learn to design, but you also learn to program a console, you learn to use the visualizers, you learn to use the lighting design software. Learn as much of it as you can, especially in this economic environment. People are looking to save money, and what better way to save money than to hire somebody who can do it all? If you can do the lighting design, if you can program, if you can tour with the show, then you're going to have a lot better prospects for employment than somebody who can maybe do the lighting design but doesn't know how to program a console.
Okay. How do you feel about the issue of too many choices at times muddying the waters of choice or design? I mean, with all of the variety of movers and traditionals, and now with the advent of LED making inroads into virtually every aspect of the industry, how does that affect your decisions?
I love it. I think that having, I don't think you can ever have too much choice. I look at it as more available lighting tools. And the great part about it is that it inspires competition between manufacturers, and it puts downward pressure on the pricing. So there's more tools available for a modest budget. So I don't look at it as a problem at all. I look at it as an opportunity.
Okay, great. Here's one that's a little bit more specific, but we'll give it a try anyhow. Will says he uses an Expression 3, and they're looking into renting movers for a few weeks gig, probably not rent a new console. Is there a resource out there that will make it easier for them to match existing gel color?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think there are some like iPhone applications. You might check the Wibron app. There's also Paul Peltier's calculator, LD calculator. If you'll Google Paul Peltier, it's Pellitier, I think. He's got an LD calculator that may or may not have that in it, but those are the only two that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. Maria wants to know, from an industry standpoint, where can they find info on trade shows? One excellent resource, obviously, is PLSN and the PLSN.com website. All the shows there are listed. Richard writes about them in advance, and then also follows up on them. Is at all the shows. Any other resources, Richard, that you could recommend where people can find out more about what's going on in the trade?
We just started a website called ProLightingSpace.com, and it's by invitation. So if you'll send me an email asking to be invited, it's rcadena@austin.rr.com. I'll send you an invitation. But that has a calendar, and the plan is to load it up with all of the events around the world, all the trade shows, and all of the demos and webinars and everything else that's going on in the industry.
Okay, great. Ivan's got a question for us. Welcome back, Ivan. I think you've been at every one of our webinars so far, or just about all. And he's got an interesting question about what's something lighting related that you used to do when you were first starting out that you would never do again now.
How's it going, Ivan? Good to hear from you, dude. Something that I used to do that I would never do now. Something that I used to do that I'd never do now. I think that as you get more mature, you tend to use less color and less movement and try to do more dramatic things more subtly with lighting angles. I can't give you anything. I can't give you anything specific right now. I'd have to think about that one. But I think it's just a matter of training your eye about what looks good and what sticks out.
Okay. All right. How about if we take two more, Richard, and then we'll call it a day?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Besides utilizing a guess and check method, is there a preferred or default color temp for lighting, for video, or photography?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. It says, besides utilizing a guess and check method, is there a preferred or default color temperature for lighting or video, say?
Oh, well, I think more importantly, you just want to make sure that all of the sources match. So in other words, you don't want to mix tungsten and daylight unless you're purposely looking for that look. So if you match all your sources, if you match everything to, for example, daylight, and then you balance your cameras to daylight, then everything should be fine. On the other hand, if you balance the camera towards tungsten and you have a big old window with light streaming through it, then the light's not going to look right, or the subjects rendered in that light are not going to look right. So you just have to make sure that all of your sources of light are matched to each other, and then balance the camera to that color temperature.
Okay. And the last question we got from George in Athens again, and this is kind of the proverbial chicken or the egg question. Are the designers driving the technology, or are the technologies driving the designers?
That's a really good question, George, and I think that a lot of this is driven from the designers. And one of the issues that I'm on my soapbox about lately is the whole thing about RDM and ACN. We've had DMX for 20 years now, and they just came out with a new standard called Remote Device Management, and lighting manufacturers are just starting to come out with products that implement RDM, or remote device management. And now we've got this whole other protocol called Architecture for Control Networks, or ACN. And it is a very powerful protocol, and there are so many things that can be done with it. But the problem is that none of the manufacturers have embraced it, other than ETC. The EOS console outputs ACN, or ETCnet 3, I think it's the same thing. But none of the lights have any of the capabilities in it. So I think it's incumbent upon designers and anybody who uses lights to talk to manufacturers and ask for these features. What features, you might ask? Well, for example, I think that every device that's manufactured should then be loaded with CAD blocks, the user manual, the protocol, the weight of the fixture, the size of the fixture, the electrical current draw should all be loaded in memory on the fixture, so that when you hook up a console to it, it sucks all that information out. Or alternately, if you hook up your lighting design software, whether it be Vectorworks, ESP Vision, LD Assistant, WYSIWYG, what have you, it should also suck that information out, and you should be able to put together schedules for any of the design people, whether they're scenic designers, whether they're structural engineers, electrical engineers, and provide a schedule of weights of fixtures, electrical current draw. You should have the CAD blocks, the user manuals, the protocol. All that information should be right there. And we have the technology to do it, but manufacturers don't think it's a priority. So I think it's incumbent upon anybody who uses lights or devices like fog machines to bend the ear of the manufacturer whenever possible and ask for it. And that's the way we get things done in this industry. Sure, the computer industry does provide us the capabilities to build consoles and lights that we have, but it's the lighting designers who are asking for those features that make it happen.
Great insight, Richard. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to wrap up for today. Again, I just want to remind everybody that this broadcast will be available as a podcast. Once we get it on our website, you can go to creativestagelighting.com to download this for future viewing. We'll also be announcing future events, so stay tuned, watch your email, and also check our events calendar on our website frequently, because we're going to be adding new events. We want to thank Jeff for having been here with us and helping us out and giving us a better understanding of exactly what he did to light the Springsteen show. And once again, Richard, thanks very much. We sincerely appreciate all the efforts that you put into developing these kind of things. And I think everybody's in agreement that great content, great job.
And I want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you guys very much at Creative Stage Lighting, and thank you, Kevin.
Okay, great. All right, thanks very much, and we'll be seeing you in the next month or so for the next edition. Take care, everyone.